Okay then, so Callum, an important win for Buckie Thistle in the context of the title race, an unimportant win for Buckie Thistle in the context of the title race, or somewhere in the middle?
I think it's a bit early to be talking about a title race after 3 games, but it's a bit of both, in the sense that Graham Stewart's right in what he said, that it's only 3 points and you don't know how important they are until later in the season. And on the flip side, Mark Cowie's also right in terms of it's the 3rd game of the season. Again, it's only 3 points. Fraserburgh's 3 points behind Buckie. You don't know the difference. I mean, that's the thing, you don't know how important or unimportant a win it'll be. The only thing I would say about it though is it's the sort of game that you always want to win against a side that you would feel is a direct rival, and the sort of game that's good for confidence and sort of does set down a wee bit of a marker early in the season. And I thought over the piece Buckie were sort of worth their victory. I mean, really, it was probably a bit of a sort of masterclass in, given the conditions on Saturday as well, in terms of how to win at Bellslea. They were playing down the hill and they had the wind at their back in the first half. The man should take advantage of that, and then in the second half, the key thing was always going to be trying not to concede a goal. I know they have right at the end, but at 2-0, the key thing was always going to be trying not to concede a goal, because that would have probably put things right back, in the balance, especially if it had been early in the second half, say the first 15 minutes of the second half. It would have given Fraserburgh a real lift. To be fair to them, they kept plugging away, but it was just never quite felt like it was going to come for them. I mean, they're a wee bit unlucky. Connor Wood's one with sort of 3-4 minutes to go that hits the post. If that had gone in, would have set up a grandstand finish. And I thought the one with 20 minutes to go, Stuart Knight's save from Logan Watt was a really good save down low. And if that had gone in, would have been interesting to see. But I thought Buckie as well, in terms of that defensive side, I think there's maybe a wee bit of a harder edge to them this season. I thought Darryl McCarty, one of their summer signings, was really good with Jack Murray, and I thought Dale Wood, another of the summer signings, Dale Wood, playing in front of the back four, was also really good at picking things up and snuffing things out.
I'll go a bit bigger. I think it's a huge early win. Statement of intent from Buckie. Call it what you like. They've been runners-up the last 2 seasons. How many teams are going to go to Bellslea and win in this campaign? Well, I think you'll be able to count them on less than one hand, to be honest. And the head-to-head games are so important in this division, as we've seen in recent seasons. And Buckie have gone to the Broch and won. They've got home advantage against the Broch in the second half of the season. That is going to count for something, because by the same token, how many teams are going to go up to Victoria Park and beat Buckie in their own patch? So if you're picking up points away from home, knowing you're so strong on your own patch, then you're not going to be far away. And Buckie have been as close as he can get without winning it in the last 2 years. Maybe this is going to be the season to go that one step further.
I was going to say as well, the 3rd goal, so it's a different thing, but with the first 2 Buckie goals as well, I think Buckie will obviously be delighted, but I think if you're Fraserburgh, you'd maybe pick a few holes in it. But the first one, it's kind of funny, because to start with, I think Kyle McLeod wins an excellent header to knock it down. Andy McCaskill does really well. Then they maybe get a wee bit of fortune in that if Kieran Simpson doesn't sort of stumble, he clears it. But once they get in, composed cut back for Kyle McLeod, and then there's probably nobody in terms of just being calm in front of goal and sticking it away. There's arguably, other players up there, but is there anybody better in that situation than Andy McCaskill? Because he never looks hurried or panicked or anything, just composed, and he'll slot it away. And then with the second one as well, really good ball in to a dangerous area, I thought, for Dale Wood. If you're Fraserburgh, you'd be annoyed at letting Andy McCaskill score a header, because without being unkind, he's not exactly renowned for his aerial prowess, but if he took it really well right in the corner, Joe Barber with no chance.
Well, there was obviously, if you've seen the highlights, which you have, a little bit of a stramash at the end of the game. 2 teams, 2 rivals. It's only natural that tempers might fray, isn't it?
Yeah, I think throughout the 90 minutes there was always a wee bit of edge to the game, and maybe, so I mean, some people were sort of talking afterwards about the referee and maybe could he have taken a wee bit more control of it, but I think he kind of tried to let the game flow as best he could, and there was always just that wee bit of needle, and I mean, in our sort of footage there you don't really see it particularly well, and I have to say at the time in the ground I didn't see it at all just because I was preoccupied with other things, but this sort of altercation with Max Barry and Brian Hay sort of seemed to be the spark for that sort of wee bit of scuffle at the end. And I mean, there was sort of, Graham Stewart was saying that Max Barry was saying Brian Hay aimed a punch at him, but it's hard to see for definite in our pictures, but I think there was certainly hands raised perhaps on both sides, and then after that there's various players pile in and a bit of sort of scuffle as well, and maybe a few other arms flailing perhaps in the melee as well. And I mean, it's not what you really want to see, is it, kind of after a game and that, and I can understand emotions get the better of people, but I think on kind of both sides really there's perhaps faults and kind of a bit of petulance for certain individuals that maybe kind of on another day they would reflect that they shouldn't be doing that.
It's good content though, isn't it? I thought that was quite a sort of entertaining affair. Every goal ended up being a tap-in, but I mean the play and the build-up to the goals was exquisite at times.
Very much so. I think there's no doubt who deserved to win, just on chances alone. Actually, when you watch it, Brechin needed to react after their disappointment of being held at Huntly the previous weekend, and they've done just that. It was a huge 3 points for Andy Kirk's side against a title rival in this early stage of the season.
Well, no, I think it was an entertaining game, but you would have expected that, really. I mean, it's two teams that, you know, they've a lot of creative players in their ranks, and you'd expect them to create chances. I thought up until the second Brechin goal, Brora were sort of holding their own to a degree in terms of the attacks ahead and the chances ahead, but after that, Brechin probably did take a bit more of a grip of it, and I think they would, again, these head-to-head games, both Brechin probably being the home team as well, were probably more of a mind that it was a game that perhaps needed to win than Brora, who I think if you'd offered them a point probably wouldn't have been too disappointed, all things considered. But I mean, it's clearly back to more like you'd expect for Brechin, and they'll probably be pleased to hang on, well, not hang on, but see the game out as they did, having lost 2-goal leads in the last 2 weeks when it was a game where it was only 2-1. To be able to see it out's a bit of a boost for them as well.
The one disappointment though will be that it was only 2-1. I mean,
Well, the chances at the end, yeah. I mean, Andy
Mm.
Kirk spoke after the game. He said 3 points is the most important thing, which it is. But if he had one criticism, it was the two Mark Scott chances, and particularly the Grady McGrath chance. I would have been, my house, my car would have been gone, betting on him to score that goal.
There's not much more you can say to it than that. I would say, on a slightly different note going forward, before the game, Brechin did a fair bit of business. They'd maybe been looking at their squad and thinking they were a wee bit short in certain areas, and we were maybe looking, going, can they get players in? But they've signed Liam Jewell, who played the first 2 games as a trialist. We saw him on the highlights win the penalty against Fairmartin on the first day, and then he scored last week against Huntly. So he's clearly impressed. He's signed for Kirriemuir Thistle. Signed Ryan Ferguson, who's, well, was at Broughty Athletic, but he's had a lot of experience in the Scottish leagues with Brechin when he's been there before, Montrose, Cove Rangers. So he's he's a player that looks a decent acquisition for them. And then they've got Ewan Murray as well, who's a left-sided player that was on loan. Well, he's on loan from Dundee, and he was on loan at Keith last season and did quite well on a couple of occasions that I saw him. So they all look like sort of good sort of squad strengtheners for Brechin, certainly going forward, because we have seen you need, over the course of a season, you do need that depth to sort of maintain your challenge.
Other results from the weekend: Rothes 2, Banksty 2 in the league. First points dropped by D this season. disappointment for them, I suppose, would be they got themselves 2-1 up going into injury time, and Alan Pollock, I think it was a forest of legs he shot through to score an equaliser at the death. But I mean, on the other hand, for Rothes, that's a good point by the looks of things.
I think it is a good point, especially when they've had fallen behind quite late on to come back. It's interesting, the quotes from Ross Jack and Paul Lawson both seem to be very much of the opinion that their side should have won it. From what I have read or gathered, it seemed like Rothes perhaps had the edge in the first half and Banks of D took a bit of a grip in the second, but I mean, it's for Rothes probably another positive step forward. The sort of slow start against Huntly improved in terms of performance against Brora last week, and now they've got something to show for their efforts. And for Banks of D, it's just, I mean, they've had a good start, but it just shows, I think particularly away from home, there's a lot of, and they know that and they've seen it last season as well, there's a lot of difficult fixtures you have to try and overcome, and I do think they'll be up towards the top end. Banks of Dean, you never know, we might be sitting here in 6 months and that point at McKessick Park might end up looking like a good point.
Clacton 2, Devon Vale 2 games in a row. Is it that Vale have given up a 2-goal lead? I mean, it's a cliche, isn't it? But you can't do that.
No, you can't. But Clack are good at home. They're really good at home. And I mean, from a Devon Vale point of view, I think they've actually made a decent start in the league this season. I mean, they're unbeaten after their opening 3 games. Personally, I think it's a surprise. I wouldn't. Well, just when I think of them finishing 17th last season, you're thinking, well, can they kick on? And they look to be doing that. So, yeah, I mean, but they'll be disappointed, obviously, with the manner in which they've let 2 points go up at the Lillywhites.
I think the thing again as well is it's not like they were 2-0 up and it was back to 2-2 by half time, where you'd still be disappointed. But it's obviously last week at Wick it was quite a late goal, and then it was dying embers stuff again on Saturday. But interesting to see Callum Ferguson, formerly of Buckie Thistle, Elgin, Montrose, Brechin last season, and a host of clubs in various countries popping up to score for Clark. I mean, if they could, there's a trialist, if they could get something sorted out with Callum, I think he'd be an excellent signing for them, just given his experience and the levels he's played at. But I mean, Jordan McDonald was again left bemoaning poor defending. That seems to have been a common theme in the first 3 weeks. He's been unhappy with the goals he's lost, and certainly with news afterwards as well that it looks like Gary Warren, due to change in his sort of work circumstances, is effectively done as a Clark player. That probably he wasn't playing on Saturday because he had a knock, but losing him as well probably doesn't help in terms of trying to improve your defensive record.
He's going to be a big loss for Clark. An experienced head at the back, there's not a lot of them at the team.
Callum mentioned Callum Ferguson, he scored the goal for 2-2, but after Rogan Reid's opener for Devon Vale, it sounded like Vale captain Harry Noble's second for the Vale.
Described as a screamer by all accounts.
And then Fergus Adams, the first goal for Clark, that was also 20 yards, fully 20 yards apparently, but maybe we'll see footage of those goals one day to confirm these things. Turriff United 1, Keith 2 goals from defenders. For Keith, Callan Gray's deflected strike for Turriff set up the nervy finish. But if you're Keith, and I said to you at the start of the season, you've got Vale away, Clark at home, Turriff away, you'll lose one, you'll draw one, and you'll win one, and you'll sit 10th. Would you take that?
Yes.
I think given context, because I think if they'd won their opener, you'd then be a bit disappointed with that, but having lost their opener and drawn last week to then have 4 points for the 3 games, I think Craig Ewan would be reasonably satisfied. You mentioned obviously 2 defenders scoring. I know it's kind of Keith for a couple of years really since the retirement of Cammy Keith. It's always been that question of trying to can find more goals, and if you can get defenders chipping in on a regular basis, that would certainly help them. And I think it's given, I mean, Turriff maybe haven't hit the levels since then, but given the way they defeated Inverurie Locos in the first day, I think for any team to go to the Harks and win, you'd be knowing that that's what Turriff could be capable of. You'd be pretty chuffed to come away with the 3 points. And it's funny as well because Keith, for whatever reason, the last couple of seasons they seem to just have a good record against Turriff. They seem to sort of have their number a wee bit. I think they got 4 points out of 6 against them last season. So I mean, the Maroons will be chuffed that their good runs continued. Clearly.
Final league game to discuss from the weekend. Lossiemouth 1 for Martin United 2. Ryan Facker's opener for Lossie cancelled out by Paul Campbell's double. This one for me, kind of double-edged. No, it's no points for Lossie so far, which is probably disappointing for them, but that's a tight loss against a really strong side, and it probably shows, that they are competitive under Frank McKettrick. Stuart Anderson, meanwhile, he's seen his side there do what they've done all season long last season, which is show resilience when they go behind and find a way to, take the 3 points.
If you want to be up there challenging, there's going to be weeks you have to grind it out. And it doesn't matter if it's week 30 or if it's week 3. You just got to go and roll your sleeves up, and that's a great result for Martin. Coming from behind, winning away from home in a tight game, can't ask for much more.
So it seemed to be a wee bit of a dubious goals panel perhaps with the opener, because it was Graham Rogers' shot that might have been going in, with the equaliser rather than the opener, but Graham Rogers' shot which might have been going in, but Paul Campbell, as good strikers do,
made sure he got a scuff on it. Yeah.
Made sure he got a touch on it, so I think he's claiming it and getting it. But for Lossie, I mean, it's worth, not that it's maybe much consolation to them, but it's worth bearing in mind they have had quite a tough start in that they've played Fraserburgh away, they've played for Martin, and in between they've played Forest, who I believe are one of only, and they weren't playing on Saturday, but I believe them and Buckie are now the only 2 teams with a 100% record still. So that's, not exactly. It's not necessarily games you would say, well, that's a major missed opportunity for Lossie. And I mean, Frank felt that Saturday was the best that they'd played so far, and he was a lot happier with the performance. His only frustration, I think, was the second for Martin goal was the definition of right on the stroke of half time by all accounts, and he felt if they could have held on at 1-1, the longer they could have kept it at that, obviously the greater chance they had of taking something out of the game.
When will teams learn not to concede on the stroke of half time? But as you say, for Lossie, it bodes well for when they're, when they play the games that will define their season. That
they'll click it.
Only
They'll
losing
click.
2-1
They'll
for
be
Martin. There were 2 GPH Builders Merchants Highland League Cup preliminary round ties at the weekend. First one to discuss, Huntly 1, Inverurie Locos 2. All the goals in the first half in this one. Jay Halliday's opener cancelled out by Ross Still before Blair Smith scored the goal that proved to be the winner. Sound like Huntly with the team maybe pushing to get back level again in the second period. But this was a win Locos really needed, wasn't it?
It was. And also, you'd have to say, it would probably be a surprise in terms of the form of the 2 teams going into it. I know we're in week 3, but for Locos going to Huntly, knowing how well Huntly have started and how poorly Locos have been, you're thinking, this could be a struggle. You'd fancy the black and golds here, but credit to Andy Lowe and his players. It's a great response to the 7-0 walloping they took a week ago.
I think in a funny sort of way, like as bad as the first couple of results were, I think in Inverurie you would have been more concerned if they didn't get some kind of response on Saturday, because not just in terms of result, but even in terms of a performance. Because if they'd been beaten as heavily as they were, if they'd then been, say, beaten again at Christie Park reasonably comfortably, that maybe lack of fight or whatever you want to say would have been concerning. But clearly there wasn't any lack of fight because they've gone and gotten a really good result. And I think in a way although they'd like points in the league, obviously I think the fact it was a cup game and they've managed to get through is probably a little lift as well, because for a club like Inverurie, they should always be looking at the cups as an avenue potentially for success. And I mean, the tricky tie next, Rothes away in the first round, but I think if they'd lost on Saturday, going out of the cup just sort of adds a sort of another it would have been a deflating really for them. I think from Huntly's perspective, Alan Hale will probably be frustrated that losing the first goal and then again the second goal, and they got done on the counter. But I think the first goal, particularly when you were playing in Inverurie, if Huntly could have got the first goal with a side that, confidence, let's be fair, wouldn't have been particularly high. If Huntly had scored the first goal, you'd probably think that would really put your opposition under pressure, but they didn't get it, and Inverurie got it. And credit as well, a couple of the young lads at Inverurie, Jay Halliday and Blair Smith, popping up with the goals, and I think both of them have got quite bright futures.
The other preliminary round tie was Wick Academy 0, Nairn County 1. Didn't sound like a particularly great game, this one, from our match report, but maybe that was the match report, I don't know. Connor Gethins with the only goal.
I think it was the report rather than the game, to be fair.
Nairn now move on to Keith at Kynick Park. It did sound tight, didn't it?
I think Nairn, over the 90 minutes, had the better chances, the clearer chances. Probably the best one of the lot. Connor Gethins stuck away as he does. But I mean, Wick, second half, playing down the hill as they like to do at Armsworth Park. They got into some good positions. It's, some decent efforts at goal, but there was never really, and Gary Manson said it after the game as well, there was never really that gilt-edged chance there for them to go and equalise. It seemed like that game where it might only be a couple of really good chances, and Nairn had the man that you would want in the right place to take theirs, and they're safely through. I mean, Stephen Mackay felt were a couple of ones they had late on that could have been more comfortable, but ultimately main thing in the cups especially, get yourself through, and that's what they've done.